It's the city of Ascalon, a fortress city, older than Rome, older than the Crusader states, older than the men who stood before its walls in the summer of 1153. A city carved from stone and fear, with walls so high that sailors at sea used them as markers to find the coast. For decades, it had been the shield of Egypt, the iron gate that blocked Christian armies from striking the Fatimid heartland. Every king of Jerusalem had tried to take Ascalon. All had failed. But in 1153, a young King Baldwin III stood before the same impossible walls, with an army far smaller than the defenders inside. The Christians were outnumbered from the beginning. The Muslims had thousands of soldiers, fresh supplies from Egypt, and a fleet ready to support them. Baldwin had only a few thousand infantry and a few hundred knights. Some chroniclers say 500 horsemen were all the heavy cavalry he could spare. Still, the king did not retreat. He did not flinch. He believed that numbers were not the only measure of victory. He believed that God was greater than walls, greater than armies, greater than fear. So the Crusaders encircled Ascalon. They built wooden towers, catapults, rams, and platforms. They dug trenches and camps around the whole city so no one could escape. The Muslims inside expected an easy victory. Ascalon had survived sieges many times before. Its walls were thick. Its gates were iron. Its people were proud. But something was different. For weeks, the Crusaders fought beneath the burning sun. Their armor grew hot, their water ran low. And still, the walls of Ascalon stood untouched. The defenders hurled stones the size of shields. They rained arrows thick as storms. They shouted insults from the towers, mocking the Christians for their small numbers. Inside the city were thousands of Egyptian soldiers, archers, and mercenaries. Outside stood Baldwin's small force, tired, hungry, and constantly harassed by raids. Every morning Baldwin walked the siege lines himself. He spoke to the knights, he blessed the wounded, and he reminded every man what they fought for, not for gold, not for glory, but for Jerusalem, for Christ, for the promise that good could triumph over overwhelming odds. But by midsummer, morale was failing. The Crusader siege engines were too few. Many had burned under enemy fire. One entire tower collapsed after defenders hurled flaming pitch on it. The Christians had no way to break the walls. And with every day that passed, Egyptian reinforcements from Cairo could arrive. Then, in the darkest moment of the siege, as frustration spread through the ranks, a single idea changed everything. It came from a young knight, whose name history barely recorded. He suggested something bold, something dangerous, something desperate. He proposed to dig under the walls, to collapse them from below. A risky strategy, one that required secrecy, precision, and courage. But Baldwin listened. He approved. The Christians began digging a tunnel near the southern wall. Men worked by torchlight, knee-deep in dust. They carved through earth with picks and knives, using their own helmets to shovel dirt. Not many, just a few dozen volunteers, but their effort would shape the destiny of the entire siege. Yet the Muslims inside soon realized something was wrong. They heard faint echoes beneath the earth. They felt tremors in the stone. They began digging a counter-tunnel. Both sides, hidden from the sun, working in darkness, racing to outsmart each other. Then the wind changed. A strange shift no one expected. A sudden, heavy gust carried smoke from the Crusader camp straight into the Muslim defenses. And through the smoke and the noise, the defenders made a mistake. A small one, but it would cost them the city. The smoke rolled across the field like a living thing. Thick, heavy, driven by a sudden wind that had not blown in that direction for weeks. It drifted over the Muslim battlements, blinding the archers. It filled the towers, forcing defenders to cover their faces. And for the first time since the siege began, the walls of Ascalon were not watched carefully. Inside, commanders rushed to reorganize their troops. Drums beat. Orders were shouted, but the smoke only grew thicker. Some chroniclers wrote later that the wind felt unnatural, as if God himself was pushing it to cover the Christian plan. Meanwhile, deep under the earth, Baldwin's miners reached the base of the wall. Their torches flickered, their hands shook, but they worked with the calm determination of men who knew they had no other chance. They packed the wooden supports with dry timbers and tar. They whispered prayers, then they lit the fuses and crawled back through the tunnel. A low rumble began. The ground trembled. Dust burst from cracks in the stone, and then a massive section of Ascalon's wall collapsed. It fell in a roar of stone and fire, sending a cloud of debris into the sky. The defenders, confused by smoke, wind, and noise, couldn't react in time. Baldwin's knights didn't hesitate. He raised his sword. Sunlight flashed on the blade, and he shouted a single order. For Christ. For Jerusalem. 500 knights charged into the breach. Not 10,000. Not 5,000. Just 500. Against an entire Egyptian garrison. The clash was brutal. Steel slammed against shields. Horses crashed through clusters of infantry. Baldwin himself fought at the front line, cutting a path through the defenders. Witnesses wrote that the Christians fought like lions, as if something greater pushed them forward. Inside the city, panic spread. The defenders were too many, too crowded. Unable to coordinate, their archers could not fire without hitting their own men. Their cavalry had no space to maneuver. The Christians, though few, struck hard and fast, a single spear piercing through a disorganized mass, and as they advanced street by street, the wind still blew at their backs, as if guiding them. But the final test was yet to come, because deep inside Ascalon, the Egyptian command was preparing a last stand, a counterattack with thousands of elite troops, and Baldwin knew that if they reached him, the miracle would end. News of the breach raced through Ascalon like wildfire. Egyptian commanders shouted for their men to form up. Drums thundered. Trumpets blared, and from the heart of the city, 10,000 soldiers surged forward, armored spearmen, archers, Sudanese guards, and elite Mameliks, a Libyan tie, against Baldwin's 500. Some Christian knights hesitated for the first time that day. They heard the rumble. They felt the tremor of thousands of feet. A wall of shields formed across the wide main street, stretching from one building to the other. "Lord, protect us," whispered one knight. Baldwin didn't look back. He raised his sword and spoke with the calm of a man who believed every second of his life had led to this moment. "We hold, here or nowhere." The clash hit like an earthquake. The first wave of Egyptians slammed into the Christian shield wall. Spears shattered. Blades scraped against steel. The sound was deafening, like thunder trapped inside a narrow canyon. But something was off. The wind, which had blown from behind the Christians all morning, suddenly roared stronger. It swept down the street, lifting dust and smoke directly into the Egyptian charge. Their front ranks flinched. Eyes burned. Discipline cracked. Baldwin seized the moment. "Push!" he roared. The 500 knights leaned forward, shields locked. Step by step, they shoved back a force 20 times their number. Those who could see called it impossible. Those who fought said it felt like something was standing behind them, pushing with them. The Egyptians tried to regroup, tried to reform their ranks, but the wind kept driving dust into their eyes, into their mouths, into their lungs. Archers on the rooftops aimed, but the gusts bent their arrows off course. A miracle of chaos. Baldwin pointed to a narrow alley on the right. Knights of Jerusalem flanked them. A dozen riders broke off, squeezing through the alley, bursting out behind the Egyptian line. Panic spread. Men shouted conflicting orders. Their formation buckled, and Baldwin struck the center. With one final push, the Christians split the Egyptian force in two. The rear ranks, terrified and confused, fled deeper into the city. The front ranks collapsed under the pressure. Within minutes, a force of 10,000 was in full retreat. But the battle wasn't over. Not yet, because at the far end of the marketplace, a final Egyptian reserve, thousands more, was forming up around the palace quarter. And if they regrouped, if they held the last district, the Christians might still be surrounded. Baldwin looked at his exhausted knights, armor dented. shields cracked, faces streaked with dust and blood. "Brothers," he said, "the Lord has carried us this far. Now we finish what he has begun." And they rode toward the final stand. The sun was high over Ascalon now, burning through the smoke, turning shattered stone and broken shields into a battlefield of blinding light. Ahead of Baldwin, the last Egyptian reserve waited, a massive block of troops forming a circle around the governor's palace. They were the best left. Armored Mamluks, veteran archers, lancers, men who had survived wars across deserts and seas. They stood in silence, not charging, not shouting, just waiting. It was a fortress of human steel, and Baldwin had 500 knights left to break it. One of his captains rode up beside him. "Your Majesty, this is a wall we cannot breach." Baldwin lifted his visor. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "Every wall has a gate, even this one." He pointed to the sky. The wind, still blowing hard from the north, bent the smoke over the Egyptian shield circle, forming a dark veil right above their helmets. Then something extraordinary happened. The smoke thickened. It swirled like a living shadow and descended across the Egyptian archers. They hesitated, then coughed, then staggered back, unable to see beyond an arm's length. Inside the Christian ranks, a murmur spread. "God is with us." Baldwin's sword rose. "Charge!" The knights thundered forward. The ground shook beneath their horses. The sound of hooves echoed like rolling thunder between the stone walls. The Egyptians braced their spears, but the wind struck again. A sudden violent blast that knocked dust into their faces at the exact moment of impact. The Christian cavalry smashed into the shield circle like a hammer of iron and divine will. Shields splintered. Spears snapped. Men were thrown backwards as Baldwin's armored horse crashed straight through the first line. His sword flashed in the sunlight. Every swing carved a space for another knight behind him. The second line faltered. The third wavered. And then the circle broke. A roar rose from the Christian knights. Not of rage, but of faith. A sound that filled the entire city. The Egyptians tried to regroup, but they were trapped between collapsing formations, falling banners, and the choking smoke still swirling overhead. One group attempted to flee to the palace gates, but Baldwin intercepted them himself. Dismounted, walked forward into the fray, and fought like a man who had no fear of death. A Mamluk captain swung at him. Baldwin parried and struck him down with a single blow. Another rushed him, cut down. A third kneeled and surrendered before even reaching him. The sight broke the last of the Egyptian resistance. Within minutes, the entire reserve collapsed. Weapons hit the ground. The survivors fled toward the southern walls. Others dropped to their knees, begging for mercy. And then silence. Ascalon, the fortress city feared for centuries, was in Christian hands. 500 had stood against tens of thousands. 500 had entered a city built to destroy armies, and walked out victorious, because they did not walk alone. The dust began to settle over the conquered city. The wind that had fought for Baldwin now calmed, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. The surviving Christian knights dismounted slowly, many leaning on their swords, too weak to stand on their own. Some looked around, waiting for another wave of enemies, because no sane man believed that 500 could defeat tens of thousands. But there were no more enemies, only silence. A silence so deep it felt holy. Baldwin removed his helmet. His hair was soaked with sweat. His face was streaked with dust and blood, but his eyes were clear. He looked toward the sky, then knelt. "Lord," he whispered, "we asked you for victory, and you gave us a miracle." Around him, one by one, the knights fell to their knees, not because anyone ordered them to, but because they understood something rare and terrifying. They were not the reason they survived. A chaplain stepped forward, voice trembling as he opened the scriptures. He read words that echoed across the ruined courtyard. "If God is for us, who can be against us?" Romans 8:31. The knights bowed their heads. Some wept. Some laughed in disbelief. Others simply stared at their hands, at the blood and dust on them, to understand how they were still alive. News of the victory spread like wildfire. Messengers galloped back to Jerusalem, shouting, "Ascalon has fallen. The Lord has delivered the city." When the people heard it, churches filled instantly. Bells rang for hours. Pilgrims dropped to their knees in the streets. Old soldiers cried openly, because everyone knew what this meant. Jerusalem was safe. The great fortress that had threatened the holy city for decades was gone. Not through diplomacy, not through wealth, but through the faith of a few hundred men who trusted God more than the numbers before them. The Egyptian commanders who escaped returned to their sultan in shame. "How did they defeat you?" he demanded. The answer came from a Mamluk officer, trembling. "It was the wind, my lord. The wind turned against us. We could not see. We could not breathe." It was as if the Nazarene God himself fought beside them. The Sultan did not reply. He dismissed them and walked away in silence, because he had heard the same stories before. From Antioch, from Derilium, from Jerusalem itself. When Christians fought with faith, the impossible often followed. Historians can debate numbers, they can argue logistics, strategy, terrain. But even those historians admit, Ascalon makes no sense. The mathematics are wrong. The odds are absurd. The outcome defies military logic. Unless the men who wrote about Ascalon were telling the truth, something greater was at work. A chronicler of the time wrote, "The wind moved as though guided by an unseen hand. We felt no fear, only purpose, and that purpose was not ours." What does Ascalon mean for us now? It means that numbers don't define destiny, that nations don't survive by strength alone, that God can raise the smallest army into a force no empire can defeat. It means that faith is a weapon not of brutality, but of courage, clarity, and purpose. Baldwin and his 500 knights did not win because they were the strongest. They won because they were the most faithful, and that is the message every Christian man needs to carry. When God stands with you, you are never outnumbered. When Christ leads, the impossible becomes inevitable. And when faith burns in your heart, no army can break you. If this story strengthened your spirit, if it reminded you that God still fights for his people, then stand with us. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments, "Christ is my strength." Every time you do, this message reaches more Christian men who need courage, direction, and faith. We are building a community of warriors, men who refuse to bow to fear, men who pick up the cross with strength, men who remember the victories God has already given us. God bless you, brother. Stand firm. And never forget, when Christ leads, you are never outnumbered.